All right, so we're going to be showing a handful of pivot table tips and tricks. So the first thing we need to do is create a pivot table. And I've got a very large data set that I'm going to be working with. All right, so first thing we're going to do is create that data set. All right, so we're going to work with the pivot table that we created in the last step. And we're going to show a very large revenue field and how to format it into millions. And so to do that, I'm dragging in this data example, region and country. And I'm going to drag in a field called total revenue, which is formatted in dollars, actually in a number format. So I'm going to come down here and click on sum of total revenue and go to value field settings. And this is kind of a two-step process. First thing is I know I want this to be in currency. So I click currency and I say that I don't want any decimal places. And what this does is it creates a format string. But I'm going to come down here to custom. So this is a quick way to see what format string we're at so far. But I want to add something to get it to millions. And so if I add a comma at the end, it's going to divide the number and show it in thousands. So I really want to do that twice. All right, and so when I click OK, you'll notice that the numbers are now going to be formatted in millions. So now is a good time to rename the field that we just created and make it a little more descriptive. So although sum of total revenue is true, what I'd like to do is rename the field. And so here you can see custom name, and I'm going to rename it to be total revenue in millions. There, now it's much more descriptive. All right, so in the data set that I'm working in, there's a lot of fields pertaining to things like how many units were sold, the price of the units, the total revenue, the total cost, total profit, but I don't see a margin percentage. And so now would be a great opportunity to create a special field that'll do that for me. So what I want to do is come up to the Analyze menu. I'm going to choose Field Items and Sets, and I'm going to create a calculated field. And so I'm going to call this one Margin. And the formula is actually really simple. It's going to be total profit divided by total revenue. Okay. And I click OK. Right, and you can see that it's in dollars. So I'm going to come over here to sum of margin, go to value field settings, change the number format, and go to percentage. We'll add one decimal place. And that's how you create a calculated field. All right. Next, I'm going to show you how to suppress errors in pivot tables. Now, sometimes you may want to leave the errors in, but if you're presenting, you probably want to remove them. But you have to be careful and understand what the error message is actually telling you. But I'm going to show you how to remove error messages. So when I added in all the data, I added in all columns, and so when I do that, I get an extra blank row here. And so my formula that calculates margin is calculating against something that doesn't have any revenue or any profit. But I want to, just for this demo, I want to show you how to remove these error messages. It comes in handy when you're having to work fast. Right, so I want to click anywhere in the pivot table, right click, and I go Pivot Table Options. Right, and then under the layout and format for this pivot table, down here there's a format, and it says for error values show. And I'm going to check it, and I'm going to leave it blank. And so essentially this is going to suppress error messages. Okay, and it's refreshing, and you'll see that what used to be a div 0 divide by 0 error is now gone, and that's how you suppress error messages. All right, next I'm going to show you the difference between what's called outline mode and tabular mode in pivot table. So I've got two fields in rows. One is region, which is shown in column A, and country in column B. And you'll notice that the country is indented. And so column A is set up to be outline mode, and maybe we'd like to change that. And so I'm going to click on region, and I could do this on the pivot table as well. I'm going to go field settings. I'm going to come over here to layout and print. And the first thing I'm going to do is where it says show item labels in outline form, I'm going to change it to be tabular form, show item labels in tabular form. And as it's refreshing, you'll notice that now it has brought the first row up to, for country, up with region. And so we're almost there, and I want to do another option that's very common when doing this kind of thing. So again, for region, I'm going to go field settings, and I'm going to go back to layout and print, and I'm going to do repeat item labels. And when I do that, it's going to fill down the region into all the way down for each country. And this gets us closer to actually a full table view of the data. The other thing that I probably would want to do is eliminate rows that would be duplicate, so things like totals. So I'm going to right-click on region, and I'm going to remove the subtotal for region. And now I have a tabular data set that I could just copy and paste. All right, so your pivot tables can operate in two different ways. There's the current way that pivot tables operate, and that's been around since about Office 2007. And then there's a mode called classic pivot tables. And I want to show you the difference. It's easier just to show it than it is to explain it. Right? I'm going to right-click on the pivot table and choose Pivot Table Options. And I'm going to go to Display. There's an option here called Classic Pivot Table Layout, and it just says it right here very neatly. Enables dragging of fields in the grid. Some users prefer this mode because you can drag and drop fields. So if you're manipulating a pivot table all the time, there's certain aspects of this mode that make it faster. So I'm going to check the box, and then I'll show you what exactly I mean. So when I say OK, this is going to switch the pivot table mode to classic view. Right? And as you can see, I can now click on country, right, and just remove it out. I could then bring in other fields like item type, and I'll bring that item type into the filter. But I can drag an item that's in the filter over to the rows rather quickly, and vice versa. And that's one of the main benefits of the classic pivot table view. Now the problem is everybody's Office is set up differently, everybody's Excel, and in previous versions of Excel, there wasn't an easy way to set how you want your pivot tables to act when you first create them. Office 365 fixes that bug, that issue, and I'll show you in the next tip how to set up your defaults if you're using Office 365. So with pivot tables, there's always been this issue around, and this goes way back in Excel, of the difference between classic pivot tables and the newer versions that have shown up in 2007. But Excel didn't provide a clean way to specify how you want to view your pivot tables. Well, in Office 365, they finally fixed that. And let me show you how. Again, this is only for Office 365. So we're going to go to the File menu, and we're going to come down here to Options, and we're going to choose Data. We're going to edit our default layout, and specifically we're going to look at Pivot Table Options. All right, and let's say that I want to set up Classic View as my default always for all brand new pivot tables. So I come over here to Display, and I choose Classic Pivot Table, and when I say OK, and set OK again. The next time that I create a pivot table, I will get, by default, a classic pivot table. All right. So as shown, I didn't have to fight or care about how another user may have created their pivot tables. When I create a brand new pivot table on this machine, it's going to show up as a classic pivot table. All right, our last tip for the day is how to access parts of a pivot table programmatically. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to do a formula here in cell G5 where I put an equal sign, and I'm going to point to something in the pivot table. And when I hit enter, you can see a few things. All right, so what it did was it put a formula here called get pivot data and a bunch of items which are filters and values. All right, and so let me show you how we can put this to use. All right, so let's say that we want to always have a report off to the side of every region and how much they sell in baby food. Let me show you how we can quickly do that. So I'm going to copy all the values that are regions. I'm going to put them here. I'm going to remove the duplicates. Okay. Remove the blank. And I'm going to look at this formula and notice that for region, it's done what's called hard coding Asia. Instead of hard coding it, I'm going to highlight the string Asia in quotes, and instead I'm going to point it to cell F5 and hit enter, and you'll notice that it's put the value corresponding to Asia in the formula. And now if I decide to drag down, it's going to replace Asia in each of the values so that I now point in cell G6, for example, it's pulling the value from the pivot table for Australia and Oceania. This one's pulling for Central America, and so on, and so on. And this allows you to be a little more programmatic in terms of how you access your pivot table. This has been Data with Daryl's Pivot Table Quick Tips. Have a favorite tip or a video you would like to see? Comment below. Be sure and subscribe so that we can help you do more with your data.